The summer of 2022 was scorching, each day blending into the next under a relentless sun. The small town of Eldridge, nestled between dense woods and rolling hills, was alive with the sounds of children laughing and the smell of barbecues. But for Emma, the heat brought a creeping unease. She had returned home from college for the summer, seeking solace in the familiarity of her childhood surroundings, but something felt off. One afternoon, Emma decided to take a hike in the woods that bordered her family's backyard. She remembered the trails from her youth, a web of paths lined with towering pines and moss-covered rocks. Armed with only her phone and a bottle of water, she set out, eager to reconnect with the wild spaces that had once felt like a second home. The deeper she ventured into the woods, the more the shadows shifted. The air was thick and heavy, and the vibrant sounds of summer seemed to fade. After about an hour, she stumbled upon an old clearing. In the center stood a decrepit cabin, half hidden by undergrowth. It looked abandoned, but a shiver ran down her spine as she noticed a flicker of movement behind a cracked window. Curiosity tugged at her. She approached the cabin, brushing aside low-hanging branches. The door creaked open, revealing a dim interior filled with dust and the scent of mildew. The floor was littered with broken furniture and shattered glass. As she stepped inside, a chill wrapped around her, cutting through the summer heat. A sudden noise of scuffling from the back made her heart race. She hesitated, then called out, "Hello." Her voice echoed eerily in the stillness. No answer. The oppressive quiet seemed to swallow her words. Emma's instinct screamed for her to leave, but something compelled her to explore further. She crept through the rooms, each one darker and more cluttered than the last. In the corner of what must have been the living room, she spotted an old journal, its pages yellowed and frayed. Curious, she opened it. The entries were erratic, filled with ramblings about fear, shadows, and a figure that watched from the woods. As she read, a name caught her eye, Marlowe. It was the name of a local boy who had disappeared years ago. The town had whispered about him for decades, claiming he'd been lured into the woods by something sinister. A chill crawled up her spine as she flipped through the pages, the final entries scrawled with frantic urgency. Then she heard it again, a soft rustle, closer this time. Fear tightened her throat. She glanced toward the door, contemplating an escape. But as she turned back, she saw a shadow flit past the window. Heart pounding, she stepped back, her instincts telling her to leave, but she felt rooted in place. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. Panic surged. She rushed to the window, pushing against the wood, but it wouldn't budge. The cabin felt alive, the walls closing in. "Let me out." She screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the forest. From the corner of her eye, she saw a shape emerging from the shadows. It was a figure, tall and indistinct, standing just outside the cabin. Emma's breath caught as she recognized the silhouette, someone she thought she'd never see again. It was Marlowe, his face pale, eyes hollow. He raised a hand, fingers pointing directly at her, a look of desperate warning etched on his face. In that moment, the cabin seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. She banged on the walls, shouting for help, but the forest remained silent. The figure outside shifted, moving closer, and she could see the sorrow and despair etched into his features. "Run," he mouthed, but the words were drowned out by a deep, rumbling growl that echoed from within the woods. In a surge of adrenaline, Emma lunged for the door, her heart racing. She slammed against it, and with one final push, it flew open, sending her tumbling into the daylight. The sun was blinding, and she scrambled to her feet, glancing back at the cabin. It stood silent now, a forgotten relic amid the trees. Marlowe was gone, leaving only the echo of his warning. Emma ran, her legs moving on instinct, through the trails that now felt alien and hostile. As she burst into the clearing behind her house, she looked back at the woods, breathless and terrified. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the town. As night fell, she could hear the distant sounds of laughter and celebration, the world unaware of the darkness lurking just beyond. Emma vowed never to return to those woods again, carrying with her the memory of Marlowe and the chilling warning that haunted her long after summer had faded into autumn. And in the depths of the woods, the cabin remained, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too far and uncover the secrets hidden within. The summer of 1995 felt sweltering in Elmwood, a small town known for its lush greenery and vibrant community. The Whitaker family had lived there for generations, their home a charming two-story house with a wide porch, surrounded by trees that offered refuge from the heat. It was a summer like any other until the day the storm rolled in. It began with a rumble in the distance, a warning that made Sarah Whitaker glance up from her garden. The sky, once clear and blue, was now a swirling mass of gray. She called her kids inside: Jake, 12, and his younger sister, Lily, 8. "Let's tidy up before it hits," she urged, glancing nervously at the horizon. As they scrambled to put away their toys, the wind picked up, whistling through the trees. The first drops of rain fell, heavy and sharp. They retreated to the living room, where the scent of wet earth seeped through the windows. The storm arrived with a fury, thunder booming and lightning splitting the sky. As the rain pounded against the roof, Sarah made hot cocoa for the kids, trying to keep their spirits high. They huddled on the couch, wrapped in blankets, watching the storm rage outside. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the house, shaking the walls. Sarah's heart raced. "Stay here," she commanded, grabbing a flashlight and heading toward the back door. She feared a fallen branch or, worse, something worse. The wind howled, and as she opened the door, a gust nearly knocked her off her feet. She shone the light toward the backyard, scanning for any signs of damage. What she saw froze her in place. The old shed, a relic from her husband's childhood, lay in ruins, its roof caved in, wood splintered. But it wasn't just the shed that caught her eye. In the shadows of the trees, she spotted something, a figure standing just out of the reach of the light. It was small, hunched, and unmoving. "Jake, Lily," she shouted, her voice trembling. The figure seemed to turn slightly, but she couldn't make out any features. A sense of dread washed over her. She slammed the door shut and locked it, her heart racing. "What was that, Mom?" Jake asked, wide-eyed. I don't know," she stammered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just stay inside." The storm raged on, but the children's chatter faded into silence. Fear gnawed at Sarah as the storm began to relent, the winds dying down and the rain easing. Hours passed, and they finally decided to check on the shed in daylight. The following morning, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a bright light over the yard. The wreckage of the shed lay scattered, but as they ventured closer, they discovered something odd. A small, worn teddy bear was half buried in the dirt, its button eyes staring up at them, lifeless and sad. "Who would leave this here?" Lily asked, reaching for it. "Just leave it, honey," Sarah replied, a chill creeping up her spine. She turned to Jake, who was peering at the trees. "What is it?" "There was someone in the woods yesterday," he said quietly. "I saw them." "Don't worry about it," she said, trying to brush it off, but anxiety lingered in her chest. They spent the rest of the day cleaning up the debris, but the unease remained. Over the next few days, strange occurrences began to unfold. Jake started waking in the night, claiming he heard whispers coming from the woods. He would sit up in bed, eyes wide, insisting that someone was watching him. Sarah dismissed it as nightmares, but her own sense of foreboding deepened. One evening, as twilight settled in, Sarah took the kids for a walk around the neighborhood, hoping to distract them. They wandered toward the edge of the woods, where the trees loomed like ancient sentinels. Jake lingered behind, staring into the underbrush. "Come on, Jake," Sarah called, but he stood rooted in place, a look of terror crossing his face. "What is it, Mom?" "There's someone there," he yelled, pointing. Sarah rushed to his side, but when she looked, there was nothing, just shadows dancing in the fading light. "You're imagining things," she said gently, but inside, dread gripped her heart. That night, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. After putting the kids to bed, she sat in the living room, listening to the creaks of the house. The air felt thick, and the shadows seemed to stretch across the walls. When she finally went to bed, sleep eluded her. In the early hours, she awoke to the sound of soft laughter echoing down the hall. Groggy and disoriented, she crept out of bed, following the sound. It led her to the kids' room, where the door was ajar. As she pushed it open, her heart dropped. The room was empty. "Jake, Lily," she called, panic rising in her throat. The laughter faded, replaced by silence. She bolted down the stairs and flung open the front door, the cool night air hitting her face. There, in the backyard, illuminated by the moonlight, stood Jake and Lily, staring into the woods. A figure loomed among the trees, tall, shadowy, and indistinct. "Kids, get inside," Sarah screamed, rushing toward them. But they stood frozen, eyes wide, as if entranced. The figure seemed to beckon, its movements fluid and unnatural. Just as she reached them, the figure vanished, swallowed by the darkness of the trees. Jake and Lily blinked as if waking from a dream. "Mom, we were just playing," Lily exclaimed, but Sarah could see the fear in Jake's eyes. "No more playing outside," she said firmly, guiding them back into the house, locking the door behind her. That night, Sarah barricaded the kids in their room, staying awake with a baseball bat clutched in her hands. She heard whispers again, low and indistinct, creeping from the woods, calling her name. Days turned into weeks, and the occurrences escalated. The laughter returned, accompanied by fleeting glimpses of the figure in the woods. The townsfolk noticed the change in the Whitakers. Whispers of strange happenings began to swirl. One afternoon, desperate for answers, Sarah visited Mrs. Hargrove, the town's unofficial historian, who had lived in Elmwood for decades. After explaining her situation, Mrs. Hargrove's face paled. "Years ago, there was a tragedy in those woods," she said, her voice trembling. "A child went missing during a storm. They say her spirit still wanders, looking for someone to play with." As Sarah left, a sense of dread settled over her. The following night, during another storm, the whispers grew louder, and the children's laughter echoed in her mind. In a fit of fear and desperation, she gathered Jake and Lily, clutching them tightly. "We're leaving," she declared, "now." But as they packed, the lights flickered, plunging them into darkness. The whispers turned into shouts, and the air grew cold. Suddenly, Jake screamed, "Mom, Lily's gone." Sarah's heart raced as she spun around. In the flickering light of the dying lamp, she saw Lily standing by the back door, staring into the dark woods. "Lily, no," she yelled, rushing to grab her. But it was too late. A strong wind burst through the door, extinguishing the light. In the chaos, Sarah felt an icy hand grasp her wrist, pulling her toward the door. She fought against it, but the pull was too strong. With a final desperate cry, she yanked free, grabbing Jake and bolting out of the house, the whispers now a cacophony of anguished wails. They ran toward the car, the storm raging above them. As they reached the vehicle, Sarah looked back one last time. The figure stood at the edge of the woods, a childlike silhouette, eyes glinting in the darkness. It raised a small hand, and for a fleeting moment, Sarah saw the teddy bear resting against its side. Tears streaming down her face, she climbed into the car, slamming the door shut. "Drive, drive," she shouted, her heart pounding in her chest. They sped away from Elmwood, leaving the house and the whispers behind. But as they left, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them, lurking in the shadows of the woods, waiting for the next summer storm to call its playmate home. The summer of 2023 was supposed to be a relaxing getaway for the Larson family. After a grueling year of work and school, they rented a charming old house on the outskirts of a small town in Maine. The house, with its weathered wooden beams and sprawling garden, seemed perfect for a week of rest and family bonding. As they settled in, Emily, the mother, felt a sense of excitement wash over her. Her husband, Mark, and their two kids, Lily and Jake, quickly fell in love with the place. Exploring the gardens and nearby woods, the first couple of days passed in a blissful blur of hiking, fishing, and barbecuing under the stars. On the third day, Emily decided to venture into the town to stock up on supplies. While driving, she noticed the locals were friendly but oddly reserved, glancing at her with a mix of curiosity and caution. One woman, who seemed to recognize her, hesitated before saying, "You know the stories about that house, right?" "What stories?" Emily asked, trying to sound casual, though a chill crept down her spine. "Just be careful with the old place," the woman replied, looking uneasy. "It has a history." Back at the cabin, Emily dismissed the woman's warning as local superstition. That evening, the family gathered around the fire pit outside, roasting marshmallows and sharing ghost stories. As the night deepened, Mark decided to share the tale of a family that had lived in the house decades ago, who had mysteriously vanished without a trace. "Very funny," Emily said, though unease settled in her stomach. The kids giggled nervously, and she couldn't help but glance at the dark woods surrounding them. The next morning, Lily and Jake begged to explore the forest. After some hesitation, Emily agreed, reminding them to stay close. She watched them run off, their laughter echoing as they disappeared into the trees. Mark joined her on the porch, sipping coffee, while Emily tried to shake off the lingering unease. A few hours later, the kids returned, but their faces were unusually pale. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, noticing their wide eyes. "There's something in the woods," Jake whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "Just a deer or something," Mark said, trying to reassure them. "No," Lily insisted. "We saw a man. He was watching us. Did he say anything?" Emily asked, heart racing. "No, he just stood there," Jake replied, shivering. He looked really old, like he didn't belong. Mark exchanged a worried glance with Emily but shrugged it off. "Let's not worry the kids. It was probably just someone hiking." That night, as they settled into bed, Emily heard soft whispers drifting through the open window. It sounded like laughter, faint but unmistakable. She sat up, straining to listen. The whispers grew louder, intertwining with the rustling leaves, and fear gripped her. She shook Mark awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. He frowned but listened intently. "It's probably just the wind." But Emily was sure she heard a child's voice mixed in with the laughter. "It sounds like they're calling us," she insisted. "Let's just go back to sleep," he said, pulling the covers over his head. Unable to sleep, Emily lay awake, the sounds growing fainter, until they eventually ceased. Just before dawn, she finally drifted off. The next morning, the kids seemed more withdrawn. "What's wrong?" Emily asked. "We had bad dreams," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Me too," Lily added, looking pale. "Let's go to town and get some ice cream," Mark suggested, hoping to lift their spirits. They piled into the car, but on the way, Emily felt an unease settle over her, the townspeople's wary glances flashing through her mind. As they arrived at the ice cream shop, the same woman from earlier approached them. "You're still in that old house?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "Why, is something wrong?" Emily asked, a knot forming in her stomach. "Just keep an eye on the kids. The woods can be deceptive." "Thanks for the advice," Mark said, trying to brush her off, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling of dread. That night, as they prepared for bed, the air felt heavy with silence. Emily tucked the kids in, but they both seemed restless. As she turned to leave, Jake's voice stopped her. "Mom, can we sleep in your room tonight?" "Of course," she said, her heart aching at their fear. They all piled into the bed, Emily's mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just outside, waiting for the darkness to swallow them whole. In the middle of the night, a loud banging jolted Emily awake. The sound was coming from the living room. Mark was already out of bed, moving cautiously toward the noise. "Stay here," he instructed, but Emily followed, her heart pounding. As they approached the living room, they saw the front door swinging open, creaking on its hinges. The air was icy, and the whispers returned, swirling around them, growing louder and more frantic. "Get the kids," Mark shouted, rushing toward the door. Emily turned to grab Lily and Jake, but they were already standing at the entrance, staring into the darkness. "Mom, he's back," Lily cried, pointing into the night. "What do you mean?" Emily shouted, panic rising in her throat. "I saw him, the man," Jake yelled, his voice trembling. "Come inside." Emily pleaded, but the children stood frozen, eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, from the shadows emerged a figure, a man, hunched and dirty, with wild hair and a vacant stare. Emily felt her heart drop. "Who are you?" she demanded, stepping forward to shield her children. The man didn't respond, he simply stared, his gaze empty, yet somehow filled with longing. The whispers grew frantic, echoing in Emily's mind. "Help us, help us." In a flash, Mark grabbed the kids and pulled them back, but the man lunged forward, eyes locked on Emily. She could feel the coldness of his presence, the weight of the stories she had dismissed. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, she slammed the door shut, locking it tight. They backed away, breathing heavily, hearts racing. The whispers quieted, leaving only the sound of their panicked breaths. "What was that?" Lily sobbed, clinging to Jake. "I don't know," Emily whispered, her voice shaking. "But we need to leave, now." They hurried to pack their things, fear coursing through their veins. As dawn broke, they loaded the car in silence, glancing nervously at the house. It loomed behind them, dark and foreboding, the whispers still echoing in their minds. As they drove away, Emily stole one last look at the cabin. The figure stood at the window, watching them leave, a silent sentinel in the fading light. The townspeople's warning lingered in her mind, a reminder that some places hold onto their secrets, waiting for the next unsuspecting family to uncover the truth hidden in the woods. Alright everyone, that brings us to the end of our story. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. And if you have similar stories you'd like to share with us, feel free to reach out. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.